I always believed that my marriage to David was as solid and reliable as a well-built house standing on a foundation of stone. We met back in college, and ever since then, we had been inseparable, or so it seemed. However, all illusions about our strong union were shattered one fateful day when everything changed. It was a quiet Sunday morning, and we were sitting at the breakfast table. David, as usual, appeared calm and self-assured. We were discussing future plans, dreaming about our own home and children. But on that day, he suddenly broached a topic that sent a chill down my spine. He leaned across the table, his gaze intense as he said, "Cindy, I need to talk to you about something important." His tone was different, a subtle shift that made my heart race with unease. I looked into his eyes, searching for clues, but there was something distant, almost calculating in his expression. My instincts screamed at me that this conversation would change everything. "What is it, David?" I replied, trying to sound calm despite the growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. He cleared his throat and continued, "I've been dealing with some financial troubles, and I didn't want to worry you. But now, I think it's time we address it together." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Financial troubles. We had always been open about our finances, or so I thought. We shared our goals, budgets, and decisions, or at least that's what I believed. I leaned in, waiting for him to reveal the extent of the problem. David hesitated before dropping the bombshell. "Cindy, I had to borrow $210,000, and I used our joint account for it." My heart stopped. $210,000 was an enormous amount of money, and we hadn't discussed any significant expenses recently. Panic surged through me as questions swirled in my mind. What could possibly require such a massive loan without my knowledge? "I had no other option, Cindy," David continued, his voice shaky. "It's a short-term thing, and I promise I'll pay it back as soon as possible." The room felt like it was closing in on me. "Short-term?" I stammered. "David, you should have talked to me about this before taking such a drastic step. We're a team, and we make decisions together." He reached for my hand, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I know, and I'm sorry. I didn't want to burden you with this. But trust me, once this is over, everything will be back to normal." Normal. That word echoed in my mind as the weight of the situation sank in. This was the beginning of a storm that would rock the very foundation of our marriage. David's revelation about the $210,000 loan hung heavily in the air between us, casting a shadow over our relationship. Days turned into weeks, and I watched as David's behavior started to change. He became distant, preoccupied with matters he wouldn't discuss. It was as if he had become a different person. One evening, as I sat in the dimly lit living room, trying to make sense of our situation, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a young man standing there. He had a friendly smile and warm brown eyes, and his name was Ken, my brother's friend from college. Ken had always been a kind and reliable person, and I was grateful to see a familiar face during such a turbulent time. "Hey, Cindy," Ken said, his voice filled with concern. "I heard about what's been happening. How are you holding up?" Tears welled up in my eyes as I welcomed him inside. "Not well, Ken. Everything is falling apart, and I don't know what to do." Ken listened attentively as I poured out my worries about David's sudden transformation and the massive loan he had taken without my knowledge. He nodded sympathetically and then shared his own suspicions. "Kindy, I hate to say this, but I think David may be hiding something even more significant from you," Ken said hesitantly. I was taken aback. "What do you mean?" Ken explained that he had accidentally come across some documents while visiting my brother's office. These documents hinted at David's involvement in a series of questionable financial decisions. It appeared that David had been secretly managing our family's finances and investments, taking on significant risks without my knowledge or consent. My heart sank as I absorbed this shocking revelation. David had always been the more financially savvy one in our marriage, but I trusted him implicitly. The idea that he had been keeping such important matters hidden from me was both infuriating and heartbreaking. Ken continued, "I think you need to take a closer look at these documents, Cindy. You might discover the full extent of what's been happening." With Ken's help, I delved into the paperwork he had brought, uncovering a web of deceit and financial manipulation that left me stunned. David had taken out loans against our assets, invested in high-risk ventures, and even purchased a lavish apartment for an exorbitant price of $350,000, all without my knowledge. The weight of his betrayal was crushing. As I confronted David with this newfound information, his demeanor shifted from guilt to anger. Our once loving relationship had become a battleground, and I was determined to uncover the truth behind his actions. The revelations about David's financial double life were just the beginning of a tumultuous journey that would lead to a courtroom showdown. The discovery of David's hidden financial dealings had transformed our marriage into a turbulent sea of uncertainty. Our arguments became more frequent, our trust eroded, and it seemed as though every day brought new revelations of his betrayal. But the worst was yet to come. One evening, as we sat at the kitchen table amidst a tense silence, David slid a stack of documents across to me. I looked at him questioningly, unsure of what he was up to now. He wore a smug expression, as if he held all the cards. "What's this?" I asked, eyeing the papers suspiciously. David leaned in, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Cindy, I've been thinking about our future, and I believe it's time we make an investment together. I found a fantastic opportunity to buy a luxury apartment, and I've already drawn up the paperwork. I just need your signature to seal the deal." I scanned the documents, and my heart sank as I saw the hefty price tag of $350,000. This was the same apartment he had purchased without my knowledge, the one that had set off alarms in my mind. The sense of déjà vu was overwhelming. "David, we can't afford this," I replied, my voice trembling with frustration. "We're drowning in debt because of your secret financial dealings. I won't sign this." But David was relentless. He launched into a rehearsed spiel about how this investment would secure our financial future, how we'd eventually make a profit, and how he had already arranged for the financing. As he spoke, he slid a document in front of me, disguised among the others. I glanced at it briefly, thinking it was part of the same stack. Unbeknownst to me, it was a cunningly crafted agreement, worded in a way that made it appear innocuous. Without fully comprehending its contents, I signed it, hoping that appeasing him would somehow bring our shattered marriage back from the brink. David's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to triumph as he pocketed the signed agreement. It was only later, after Ken helped me review the documents more carefully, that we realized the extent of David's deceit. That seemingly innocuous paper I had signed was, in fact, a binding contract for the purchase of the extravagant apartment, and it held me liable for the entire $350,000. David had manipulated me into taking on a crushing debt, all while knowing that I worked at Walmart and would never be able to cover such a massive financial burden. The revelation left me feeling devastated and trapped. My trust in David had been shattered completely, and I had no idea how to escape the financial quicksand he had pulled me into. With a heavy heart, I knew I had to take action. But little did I know that David's betrayal would soon escalate to a point of no return, tearing our marriage apart at its seams. The weight of my signature on that deceitful document began to crush me. I felt like a pawn in David's elaborate game, a game where he held all the cards and manipulated me at every turn. Our home, our dreams, and my financial stability were hanging by a thread, all because I had unknowingly signed away our future. As the days passed, David's behavior grew even more erratic. He withdrew further into his own world, avoiding any discussions about the mounting debt or his secretive financial schemes. He seemed to relish the power he held over me, exploiting my vulnerability at every opportunity. One evening, Ken visited me, concern etched across his face. He had been researching the legal aspects of our predicament and had uncovered a troubling fact. David had not only deceived me into signing that contract, but had also been funneling money out of our joint accounts to fund his extravagant lifestyle and finance his other investments. "Cindy, we need to act fast," Ken said urgently. "David's actions could ruin you financially if we don't stop him." With Ken's support, I decided to seek legal counsel. I approached a lawyer to discuss my options and understand the implications of the contract I had unwittingly signed. The lawyer's words were grim. I was legally bound to fulfill the terms of the agreement, and failure to do so could lead to dire consequences, including the loss of our home and assets. As I sat in that lawyer's office, a sense of desperation washed over me. I knew I couldn't shoulder this burden alone, but my pleas for David to take responsibility fell on deaf ears. He had become a stranger, driven by greed and deceit, and he seemed determined to see me suffer the consequences of his actions. The next step was clear. I had to take legal action to protect myself and salvage what was left of our shattered lives. With Ken's unwavering support, I filed a lawsuit against David, accusing him of financial deception and fraud. It was a painful decision, but it was the only way to break free from his web of lies and manipulation. As the lawsuit progressed, I faced not only the legal battle, but also the emotional turmoil of severing ties with the man I had once loved. David's reaction to the lawsuit was explosive, filled with anger and threats. He begged me to drop the case, promising to make amends and pay off the debts he had accrued. But I had learned the hard way that David's promises were empty, his remorse shallow. The damage had been done, and I was determined to see justice served, even if it meant taking him to court. As the legal battle intensified, it became clear that the betrayal ran deeper than I could have ever imagined, and the true extent of David's deceit was yet to be revealed. The legal battle with David was taking a toll on me emotionally and financially. I found myself consumed by the stress of the lawsuit, trying to juggle work at Walmart and court appearances while grappling with the deep sense of betrayal that had tainted my marriage. As the court date loomed closer, David's behavior became increasingly erratic. He refused to cooperate with the legal process, often missing court hearings and ignoring subpoenas. It was as if he was trying to prolong the agony, to keep me ensnared in his web of deception. One day, as I arrived home from work, I found a note on the kitchen table. It was from David, and it read, "Cindy, I can't handle the pressure of the lawsuit anymore. I need some time to think and clear my head. Don't try to contact me. I'll be back when I'm ready." I was stunned. David had vanished, leaving me to face the legal battle alone. He had abandoned our home, our marriage, and his responsibilities, disappearing without a trace. Days turned into weeks, and there was no sign of David. He had effectively cut ties with me and seemingly vanished from our lives. My emotions were in turmoil, torn between the anger and hurt caused by his betrayal and the lingering love I had once felt for him. Ken continued to be my pillar of support during this trying time. He helped me navigate the legal proceedings, even as we struggled to locate David and serve him with court documents. It became apparent that David was evading the consequences of his actions, choosing to hide rather than face the truth. The financial burden was crushing, and I was drowning in debt. My once stable life had unraveled before my eyes, and I was left to pick up the pieces. The emotional pain ran deep, and the betrayal I had endured haunted my every thought. Despite David's disappearance, the lawsuit continued, and it was evident that I had to see it through to the end. I had to fight not only for justice, but also for my own sense of self-worth and dignity. As the court proceedings continued, the evidence against David mounted, revealing the extent of his deception. It was during this time that I received an unexpected message from David. He begged for forgiveness, claiming that he had made a terrible mistake and wanted to make amends. He promised to return and face the consequences of his actions. But could I trust his words, or was this just another ploy in his elaborate game of deception? Only time would tell as the courtroom drama reached its climax. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I sat in the courtroom, my heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and determination. David had reappeared as he had promised, but his presence only fueled the emotional turmoil that had enveloped me since the beginning of this ordeal. As the legal proceedings commenced, the evidence against David was presented methodically. His financial deceptions, the secret loans, and the fraudulent purchase of the extravagant apartment were all laid bare for the court to see. My lawyer, with Ken's support, painted a vivid picture of the web of deceit David had woven. David, on the other hand, seemed like a broken man. His once confident demeanor had crumbled under the weight of his actions and the mounting evidence against him. He pleaded for forgiveness, admitting that he had made grave mistakes and had let greed cloud his judgment. The courtroom drama intensified as we reached the climax of the trial. The judge, a stern figure who had been overseeing the proceedings, listened attentively to both sides. It was clear that the case had far-reaching implications not only for David and me, but for the principles of trust and honesty within a marriage. As the judge prepared to deliver the verdict, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Would justice be served? Would David be held accountable for his actions, or would he manage to evade the consequences once more? Finally, the judge spoke. Based on the evidence presented and the gravity of the financial deceptions committed, I find the defendant, David, guilty of fraud and breach of trust. The court orders him to serve a prison sentence of 7 years and to pay restitution in the amount of $250,000 to the plaintiff, Cindy. David's face contorted with shock as the reality of his actions and their consequences set in. He was handcuffed and led away, his pleas for leniency falling on deaf ears. In that moment, justice had been served, and I had finally achieved a sense of closure. David's betrayal had come at an enormous cost, but I had stood my ground and fought for what was right. The legal battle had been grueling, but I had emerged stronger, having reclaimed my sense of self-worth and dignity. The road to recovery was long and challenging, but I was determined to rebuild my life, free from the shadows of David's deceit. Ken continued to be a steadfast friend, supporting me every step of the way. The scars of the past would always be a part of me, but I had learned the importance of trust, resilience, and the unwavering power of self-determination. As I walked out of the courtroom that day, I knew that I had taken a decisive step towards healing and rebuilding my life. David's betrayal would forever be a painful chapter in my past, but it had also been a catalyst for my personal growth and newfound strength.